Tonight, we get to meet again, and honestly, I couldn't be happier. Thank you for coming back to the channel, where we follow every step in the life of Lythica. Today, I'm bringing you the next part of the story everyone's been waiting for. New twists are slowly unfolding, detail by detail, and trust me, the deeper we go, the more emotional it gets. So, get comfy, hit play, and let's see what Lythica will face today. And where her heart will lead her. Ready, everyone? Let's dive in. That morning, the whole village felt like it had sunk beneath a heavy white blanket. Thick fog smothered the dirt road in front of the house, so dense that even holding a hand out in front of you, everything looked blurred. The trees, the fence, the familiar bamboo bushes, all vanished, swallowed by a cold, colorless whiteness. The early winter chill wasn't just nippy anymore, it cut straight into the flesh. The air was unnervingly quiet, broken only by a distant rooster crowing, the sound half muffled by the fog. Lythica pulled her thin jacket tight, curling her shoulders inward to block the wind. Her hands were flushed red from the cold, fingers stiff and aching so badly she kept bringing them up to her lips to warm them, rubbing them together desperately for a bit of heat. Every breath she exhaled drifted out as a pale mist, floating briefly before dissolving into the air. She muttered under her breath, voice low and raspy from the cold. It's only the start of winter and it's already freezing like this. The sky showed no sign of sunlight at all, just a flat, pale gray. It wasn't until nearly noon that the brightness even tried to break through, and even then, it barely warmed anything. The fog thinned, replaced by a dry, prickling harshness that burned her hands and cracked her lips. She stared down the path leading to the fields and shook her head. To harvest in this kind of weather was basically asking for misery. Cold, damp soil, tools stiff with the chill, everything would take twice as much effort. As she walked, Lythica sighed, her mind running through every expense, every coin she'd have to spend soon. She thought about what she could do at home instead, maybe dry clothes, pick vegetables, prep food to sell, anything that let her stay indoors while still earning a little. Even though her shoulders trembled from the cold, her eyes held that familiar resilience. That's life, the weather can be cruel, but the work still has to be done, food still needs to be on the table, and a woman simply doesn't get to be weak. She tightened her scarf and kept walking through the fog, cold and worried, but steady, just like every other day. After walking a few rounds around the yard to warm herself up, Lythica decided to take advantage of the morning and harvest some vegetables from the garden. In winter, greens and root vegetables grow slowly, but luckily the beds she planted earlier were still thriving. Today, she planned to make a small batch of kimchi, partly to save for her own meals, partly to bring to the market later and earn whatever she could. She bent down, her hands icy cold but still gently picking each crisp leaf. The mustard greens were soaked with dew, stinging her fingers with their freezing touch, but she stayed patient. Every time she gathered a handful, she shook off some water and dropped it into the woven bamboo basket by her feet. Making kimchi in weather like this was a bit of a struggle, but she was used to it. Selling just a few jars would ease the grocery expenses at home, and that alone was enough motivation. When she stepped into the kitchen and opened the cabinet for spices, she suddenly froze. Oh no! I'm out of green onions. She set the vegetables on the table, tightened her jacket, and hurried out to the front garden. The little green onion stalks still stood firm, even with dew clinging to their tips. Lythica crouched down, pulling them one by one, the cold, wet soil sticking to her hands made her shiver. Goodness, my fingers are going numb. Once she had a small bunch, she brought it into the kitchen to wash. The cold water hit her skin, making her gasp sharp breaths, lips tightening from the chill. Her breath turned into faint mist, drifting into the cutting winter air. While rinsing the onions, she glanced toward the gate, her brows knitting slightly. Where on earth is Hung? Why isn't he back yet? She kept staring at the yard for a moment, as if afraid she'd miss the sound of his familiar motorbike. But outside, there was only fog, cold wind, and a silent empty yard. Lythica let out a long sigh and continued washing the onions, working, waiting, and quietly hoping that old metal gate would swing open any moment. Inside the small kitchen, the cold from outside slipped through every gap in the wooden door, drifted beneath the thatched roof, and curled across the icy brick floor. Yet somehow, with the steady rhythm of chopping and the faint freshness of Napa cabbage in the air, the space felt strangely warm. The little fire beneath the wood stove crackled softly, its golden glow dancing on the walls, casting warm flickers that pushed back the harsh early winter chill surrounding the village. Hoài sat at the old wooden table, her hands moving swiftly as she sliced the crisp, pale green cabbage. The knife tapped against the cutting board in an even rhythm, each cut clean and identical. She'd done this for so long that every movement flowed as naturally as breathing. The vegetables, washed, drained, and neatly trimmed, were mixed with salt, ginger, chili powder, crushed garlic, their colors blending beautifully, their scent filling the kitchen, making the whole room come alive even though the outside air was cold enough to turn every breath into mist. Suddenly, the back door swung open, letting in a blast of cold air. Hung stepped inside. Dust from the road clung to his jacket, his hair damp with fog, his face tired from traveling a long way. But the moment he saw Hoài working by the stove, his eyes softened instantly, half his exhaustion melting away. Leaning a shoulder against the doorframe, he watched her for a moment, then smiled gently. "You're amazing, Hoài. There's nothing you can't do." Just that simple sentence made warmth rush to her cheeks. She ducked her head slightly, a small smile tugging at her lips, her voice suddenly softer. "I'm just trying to earn a little extra. Going out to harvest in weather like this is rough." Hung pulled out a chair and sat beside her. His presence alone warmed the kitchen even more. Their voices blended with the occasional sound of her knife hitting the board, creating a quiet, cozy sense of home. They talked about the cold these past few days, how harsh it had become, how even the market was emptier. Then about the price of vegetables and meat rising unpredictably. And somehow, the conversation drifted to Tony, the boy they both cared about deeply, even though he was all the way in the city. Resting his arms on the table, Hung's tone suddenly grew lower. "Tony's used to living down there, but he doesn't have anyone to really look after him. It's good that Do helps, but what about later? He can't stay forever." The kitchen fell silent. Hoài froze mid-motion, her knife suspended in the air. A shadow of worry crossed her eyes, that exact fear had been clinging to her for days. The couple began discussing again. Their voices were calm, steady, but every word carried the weight of responsibility. "Should we hire someone to watch the house, and maybe help with the garden too? I need to learn to ride a motorbike. It'll make things easier. I can't keep depending like this. No matter what happens, Tony cannot drop out of school." The list of things to worry about kept growing, just like every family's never-ending duties. Yet through it all, Hung kept his voice gentle, steady, trying to ease her burden. He placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze, his tone warm and full of quiet responsibility. "Leave it to me. Don't overthink it, this cold will wear you out." Hoài took a slow breath, her eyes softening with a sense of comfort. In the biting early winter cold, within the small kitchen filled with the scent of cabbage and the warmth of the fire, Hung's presence felt like a steady flame, small, but warm enough to reach her heart. After finishing the first few jars of kimchi, Hoài sat down on the wooden chair beside the stove, her shoulders finally relaxing as if some of the morning's exhaustion had lifted. The kitchen grew quiet again, leaving only the crackling of the wood fire and the sharp scent of chili powder and crushed garlic lingering in the air. She wiped a bit of sweat from her forehead, not from heat, but from working non-stop since dawn. She turned slightly, resting her hands on the damp table, and looked at Hung washing his hands nearby. Her voice dropped, as if she'd been holding this sentence for a long time. "My mom, Anha, took her to the city to stay with him. So he can take better care of her." Hung paused, tilting his head to listen. Hoài continued, a faint, bittersweet smile appearing on her face. "The two of us struggled so many years. Now she has a proper place to live. She won't have to travel back and forth anymore. I feel much more at ease." Her eyes softened, the reflection of the fire making them glimmer, carrying within them the weight of all the years she and her mother had endured. Days running from storms. Days living on porridge and garden greens. Days when they skipped medicine because it was too expensive. Now just blurry memories, yet still enough to sting her eyes when she talked about them. Hung nodded, lips curving into a gentle, understanding smile, the kind of nod from a man who knows hardship, and is grateful that someone is helping care for the woman who raised his wife. Suddenly, Hoài hesitated. She fiddled with a kitchen towel, her voice dropping even lower, as if afraid someone outside might hear. "Your mother, she came to see me." Hung immediately looked up, his gaze sharpening, not angry, but alert. Hoài took a breath, then said quietly. "She didn't come to scold me. She came to apologize. She asked me to help her convince you to come back and live with her again." The words fell into the room like a cold gust, dropping the temperature by half. Everything went still. Hung stood frozen, the towel in his hand suspended midair. After a long silence, he lowered his gaze, his voice steady and heavy like a stone. "I only need you and Tony. As for her, I don't want to think about that anymore. No anger. No bitterness. Just a man who had been hurt enough, who no longer had the strength to walk back into old wounds." His voice was so calm it made Hoài chest tighten. She didn't respond. Half her heart ached for her husband, half mourned the broken bond between mother and son. But life doesn't pause for emotions. At noon, the winter sunlight grew harsh enough to sting the skin despite its weakness. Inside the house, the jars of kimchi were neatly sealed, ready for the market. Hoài tied the handle of her basket securely, adjusted her headscarf, and stood up, brushing off her clothes. Seeing her prepare to leave, Hung stepped forward, worry in his voice. "Let me take you." Hoài chuckled softly, pushing his shoulder lightly, a small gesture filled with affection. "You just came back from a long trip. Rest a bit. Walking will warm me up, I'll be fine." A simple sentence, yet warm like a cup of hot tea in winter. Hung wanted to argue, but her determined eyes silenced him. He just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, watching her every movement. Hoài lifted her basket and walked out into the yard. The dry winter sunlight fell on her neatly tied hair, catching tiny strands that shimmered like silver. A cold breeze lifted the hem of her coat. The dirt path to the market still held the marks of morning tires and patches of dew not yet dried. She walked quickly, but with steady confidence. Small, tough, unshaken, as if she'd weathered every kind of winter life could throw at her. The bamboo leaves rustled as the wind passed, whispering like a farewell from the roadside. Hoài moved forward in that cold, pale sunlight, restless yet resilient, carrying with her a fragile but stubborn hope for the better things waiting ahead. At the same time Hoài was walking along the red dirt road toward the market, carrying a basket of warm kimchi fresh from the stove. On the other side of the village, across a few hills, Anha was standing silently in front of the old house where he and his mother had lived for most of his life. There is a particular feeling when you stand before the home that raised you for decades. It doesn't make you burst into tears. It doesn't shout. It simply tightens your chest little by little, until breathing feels heavy. The path leading to the house wasn't long, but today, to Anha, it felt like it stretched across an entire lifetime. Every bump in the dirt, every water ditch on the sides, every old bamboo clump, all of it was so familiar it had carved itself into his memory. He used to run barefoot down this very path, tripping over stones, then crying until his mother lifted him up. Now, returning after so many years, everything was still there, except time had changed all the rest. He stood before the fragile bamboo gate, the one his mother had once tied together with an old rope. That rope was now rotting, half undone. The wind pushed against the gate, making it rattle with a dry, hollow sound. Just that small sound alone was enough to make his heart sink. The house was still there, but it wasn't truly a home anymore. It felt like a shadow of all the hard years that were warm, all the hardships that were full of love. The thatched roof had collapsed on one side, the burnt, sun-dried patches looked brittle enough to crumble. The earthen walls had deep cracks, some large enough to slip 2 fingers through. The porch was mottled with mold, with moss creeping all the way up to the doorway. Yet these broken pieces reminded him of the nights he and his mother ate by lamplight, the sound of rain hitting the roof, the smell of roasted sweet potatoes they shared on cold windy days. Memories of poverty, yet warmth. Warm in a way no city apartment could ever replace. But reality was unforgiving. This house was no longer livable. And his mother, she absolutely could not stay in a place this damp, this drafty. Anha took a deep breath, gathering the last bit of courage he had, then turned to the buyer standing near the gate. "Please, come inside and see the land, the house." They walked into the yard. The ground that his mother used to sweep every evening was now cracked into large, dry squares. The old mango tree in the corner, once the center of his childhood games, was now withered, its branches so sparse the bones of the limbs showed through. The wooden slats along the wall were crooked and warped, looking like they might collapse with just one strong storm. The buyer said nothing, only inspected each crack, each rotted bamboo beam. Anha tried to keep his voice steady, though anyone paying attention would notice the slight tightness in his throat. "I work far from here, traveling is difficult. My mother gets sick easily. I have to bring her to the city. Too few people live here, it's impossible to rebuild anything solid." The buyer simply nodded. No pity. No warmth. Just the nod of a man evaluating property, practical and cold. He said, "Show me the land in the back." Anha led him down the narrow path beside the house, the same path he had toddled down at age 3, the path where he'd once chased chickens with his childhood friends. Behind the house opened a stretch of land so wide it almost stole breath. 150 meters across. 400 meters deep. A long ribbon of fertile soil stretching all the way toward the foot of the mountain. The orchard atop the hill spanned 3 to 4 hectares, mangoes, jackfruit, guavas, pomelos, every tree heavy with fruit. So many that some branches sagged, close enough to pick with just an outstretched hand. A small paradise. If only it had a land title. But life rarely grants such sweetness. Anha stood watching the buyer examine each tree, each patch of soil, his heart sinking like a stone. Years of sweat poured into this land, years of his mother's tears falling at the roots of these trees. Now everything was worth only as much as unregistered farmland. The buyer returned to the front of the house, arms crossed, eyes sharp and calculating. "I'll only pay 320 million. The house is ruined. No land papers. Remote area. Final price." A short sentence, but it cut straight into Anha's chest. 320 million. For his childhood. For the countless stormy nights his mother stayed awake. For the youth he had buried in this soil. He stood motionless. His hands tightened slightly, heart pounding once, then settling. And finally, he nodded. Not because he wanted to sell. But because he no longer had any better choice. "All right. I accept." They dragged an old wooden table into the yard. Its surface was warped and stained, with tiny black burn marks from old charcoal fires. Anha picked up the pen to write the agreement. His hand trembled slightly, not out of fear, but sorrow. Sorrow for half a lifetime. Sorrow for his mother's labor. Sorrow for the version of himself that once lived here. When the buyer left, Anha remained, standing for a long, long time before the old house. He touched the faded bamboo door. The same door that opened every morning when his mother woke him. The same one that closed each night as they leaned on each other to sleep. He looked up at the thatched roof, the one that used to leak into an old aluminum pot during rainy season, where he and his mother once set bowls to catch falling drops. He looked down at the cracked doorstep, where he used to peel corn, where he once waited for his mother to return from cutting grass. His face looked calm, but deep inside was a quiet loss that had no name. Tomorrow, he would go to the commune office to finalize the transfer papers. And this old bamboo door would open only one final time for him to walk through. Then it would close closing with it an entire chapter of life for mother and son. That noon, the village market wasn't as crowded as usual. The dry winter sunlight fell thinly over the old shop roofs, casting a pale golden shade unique to early winter days. The vegetable sellers sat quietly behind their stalls, sometimes waving away flies, sometimes chatting in low voices to ease the boredom. Hoài sat at her familiar corner of the market, the spot that always caught a breeze, no matter the season, just enough to make the heat feel bearable. In front of her were neatly arranged jars of glossy, bright red kimchi, their colors glowing under the light. The mix of chili, garlic, ginger, and the subtle sweetness of radish drifted out, filling a small section of the market with a mouth-watering aroma that made passers-by turn their heads. A few customers stopped to ask questions: how she made it, how much it cost. Hoài smiled warmly at all of them, her hands working quickly to wrap and bag each jar, her voice gentle but lively. She was so focused on selling and calculating whether today's sales would bring in enough profit, that she had no idea someone was looking for her back home. At the same moment, at the end of the narrow path leading to her house, the sound of a motorbike hummed steadily. A brand new bike, still carrying the faint scent of plastic, rolled into the yard. And the man who stepped off it was Anha. He looked completely different from the man of years past, no longer the worn, dusty figure shaped by hard labor. His shirt was tucked neatly into his trousers, his shoes were clean, his hair combed. His suntanned face carried the confidence and steadiness of a man who had finally built something for himself. Even the way he walked held a quiet certainty. As he parked the bike, Hung stepped out from the house, wiping his hands on an old towel. Anha. Long time no see. Come in, sit down. Anha smiled, the gentle smile time had never managed to take away. I came to visit you too. And, to tell you some good news. They sat down at the bamboo table under the porch, where the faint smell of firewood and fresh soil always lingered. Hung poured hot tea, steam rising thickly before blending into the cool winter breeze, a warmth that felt uniquely mountainous. After a moment, Anha finally spoke. This morning, I finished selling the land. Got the full 320 million. Hung smiled sincerely. That's great. Your work's been going well, and now you've got money to take care of your mother too. Ha leaned back, his eyes drifting slightly, distant but filled with hope. Yeah. I'm combining that money with my savings from the past years. I'll bring my mother to the city. And maybe buy a small house near my workplace. She'll be warmer there, and won't fall sick as often. Hung nodded. You two have suffered enough. It's time to live comfortably. Ha looked around the yard he'd visited so many times in the past. Memories of the village rushed over him. He exhaled slowly. I regret not seeing Hoài the day I moved. My mother keeps mentioning her. Hung chuckled. She's selling kimchi at the market. I'll tell her you came by. Ha nodded, genuine gratitude in his eyes. Thank you, both of you have helped me more than you know. I hope this new life will be kind to us. Really kind. He stood, put on his helmet. Before starting the bike, he turned back, voice full of sincerity. Wishing you both good health. Every time I return to the village, I'll come visit. The new motorbike hummed softly as it rolled out the gate, disappearing behind the red dirt bend, where sunlight turned the rising dust into a floating golden haze. Hung stood on the porch, watching for a long time. Inside, the scent of hot tea still lingered, and Ha's cup was still warm, like the kindness he had just left behind. At the market, Hoài was still serving customers, her hands quick, her smile gentle. She had no idea she had just missed a meeting that Anha had been hoping for, a farewell both sides would have cherished, and now quietly regretted. That afternoon passed in half-finished conversations, unexpected encounters, and quiet regrets that never had the chance to be spoken aloud. Each person was in a different place, Hoài at the market, Hung at home, Anha on the road back to town, yet their lives remained quietly intertwined by invisible threads of family, old bonds, and genuine affection. The winter wind was cold, but people's hearts felt warmer thanks to simple, honest words. Some things must be sold in exchange for peace. Some people must leave to find a new beginning. And some missed meetings end up becoming the most beautiful memories. And with that, today's chapter comes to a close. Tomorrow, Hoài will learn that Anha came looking for her, and how will she react? Will life in the city treat Anha and his mother kindly? And in this harsh winter, what more will Hoài and Hung's family have to face? See you all in the next episode tomorrow to find out which direction everything will unfold. Don't forget to leave a comment below to share your thoughts, and follow the channel so you won't miss the upcoming part of the story. Thank you for watching until the end. See you next time.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Hôm nay thì mình tiếp tục đưa đến video tiếp theo về nội dung của câu chuyện Lythieuca và cảnh sát hồn nha mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì đã luôn yêu quý và theo dõi kênh của mình.